Attachment can be defined more or less as, an emotional bond that somebody has with another person. And older theories of attachment might have been based off of psychoanalytic theories, for instance, Freud, who would indicate perhaps that attachment would be dependent on sort of a fulfillment of certain urges. Maybe it's sexual urges like oral or anal. But then John Bowlby sort of changed the script on that a bit, realizing that it wasn't necessarily a behavioral thing on the part of the infant, but instead that it was evolutionary, that it was something that was innate into an infant's psyche, essentially. They weren't just seeking fulfillment of an immediate need, but they were seeking comfort and protection from a primary caregiver. And perhaps this was evolutionary also, to help protect infants so that they remain close to their caregivers. Ainsworth was a psychologist in the 70s who expanded on that. She performed a couple of, many groundbreaking experiments called the Strange Situation, which really showed how strongly attachment can affect behavior. And she, through her studies, came up with a couple of different levels of attachment, or a couple different stages for children. And you had anything from ambivalent attachment, where children are very, very overwhelmed when the parent leaves the room. You have avoidant attachment, where children tend to avoid the parents or the caregivers. Maybe it's a sign of neglect, maybe it's a sign of abuse. Disorganized attachment, where the kid's just kind of all over the place. A total lack of a pattern, essentially. And it could mean that the parent is not consistent with the way they parent their child. And the last one is secure attachment. Sure, the kid gets upset when the parent leaves, but as soon as the parent returns, they return to the parent, seem assured and happy at that point. Now, the child that you see in this picture, at the time this picture is taken, I would say is pretty securely attached. That child happens to be me, and I think the year is 1979 or 1980. The woman holding me is my mom. The people around me, no idea who they are. Of course, in hindsight, I now know they are my extended family, all of whom live in Germany, and this was taken shortly after my mom divorced and we moved back to Germany from the States. At this point, I personally don't recall having experienced any trauma. My mom had gone through a lot with her first marriage, but I seem to be pretty well adjusted. When I met these strangers in this very strange situation, as Ainsworth would call it, of course, I was freaked out. As the story goes, I had a conniptious fit during this photo shoot, and only upon sitting in my mom's lap would I behave. By the time this picture was taken, this is around 82, I think. I was 5 years old. With my mom and my grandmother, we had moved back to the States. My mother had remarried. And by this point, I'd become maybe a little more ambivalent, or maybe more disorganized, to be honest, in terms of my attachment. At this point, my stepfather was extremely abusive. And my mother sometimes took his side in a way that made me feel kind of all over the place, disoriented, confused, not knowing really whom to turn to. I still relied on my mother heavily for comfort, and I still really enjoyed the presence of my mom, but only the presence of my mom. As soon as my stepfather would come into the picture, I avoided both parents. So maybe that was a little touch of avoidant as well. But the fact that the pattern was all over the place kind of leads me to believe that later in line, I became a little disorganized in my attachment, which shows, the neuroplasticity of behavior, honestly. But as this last picture shows, I think I was about 10 years old. My mom was still my rock, right? Unfortunately, my mom died in 99. But I did, survive long enough to give her a child that was in college on a full scholarship. She had since become much more independent, much less reliant on men, and we had developed a really close friendship by that point. Unfortunately, like I said, she's passed on. And the next 20 years after that are a whole different story of all kinds of disorganized attachment to men, to drugs, to all sorts of other things. I'll look into the drug part of my story on our reflection assignments, which you'll also see posted on this Moodle. So thank you very much.